Those of you who know me probably noticed something different about my appearance. I'm not wearing glasses, and that's good and it's bad. It means that the surgery's worked, but it also, just so recent, it means I don't have my glasses yet that I need to really see you properly. So I can make out the crowd pretty well. I know more or less who you are, but it's not perfect. So it's a very interesting situation to be in. I know you're out there. So what I want to do today is talk about some of the issues that could come up for those of you who are in the writing game, and that includes all of us. One of the first things that I discover when I talk to people about their concerns regarding writing is that they tend to think about projects in a way that's counterproductive. If you look at this picture, what do you see on the right? No penalties for guessing. What is that on the right side of the screen? On the left side. What's on the left side? Rock, stones, yeah. Rocks, cliffs, stones, yeah. What's on the right side? Cathedral, yeah. So at one point, that cathedral, which is actually the Santiago de Compostela Cathedral, that was a pile of rocks, was a big gigantic rock. And if you were a stonemason or a designer thinking about building a cathedral and you said, wow, I've got this vacant space, the cardinal wants me to put a cathedral up here, it's got to be beautiful, it's a daunting challenge. But if you say to yourself, you know, the cathedral ultimately boils down to assembling a bunch of rocks, shaped rocks nonetheless, but still assembling those rocks, the task is not quite so daunting. It's a question of not seeing the final product as something you need to achieve. It's seeing the intermediate products on the way to your final product. So some of what I'll be talking about today have to do with that. What are the stages you might go through in getting to the beautiful cathedral, assuming you start with a pile of rocks? Now, there's not a particular order to what I'm going to talk about. Just, as Phil said, I like to give tips, and one of the tips that I always like to slip in somewhere, and I decided to put it in here, is that when you're deciding on the audience for whatever you're doing, at some point you have to think about the target journal. Even if you're just starting a dissertation, there's still the question of who is going to be reading this. And if you think about what the choices might be, where could you aim? What target? How high should you shoot? I like to use sports analogies. And one of the analogies I particularly like is when you think about college athletics and you think about seedings and playoffs, how do teams get placed in advantageous positions? I'm a big women's soccer fan. Carolina happens to have the best women's soccer program in the world. And so I've had a good model to follow. And when you ask the people making the schedules before the season starts, what are you going to do? Well, you have a choice. You could pick for the beginning part of the season a lot of lesser teams, lower division teams, weaker teams, and really ramp up a record, substantial record, have a huge winning percentage. Or you could start immediately scheduling the toughest teams you could find, the most difficult, beastly challenges that are out there. Does it make any difference? Well, we know this from the college ranks that it certainly does. We know one of the disadvantages of starting out with that weak schedule, playing the Little Sisters of Mercy or Our Lady of Perpetual Sorrows or whatever the school might be. Division III, you know that school, right? Okay, so one of the difficulties is that, for one thing, it gives your team a very false sense of their abilities, builds a false sense of security. And more importantly, it's not the case that you're fooling anybody. The people who make the choices for who gets placed into the brackets know the field. They know that you padded your record by picking these lesser opponents. So I say, well, start immediately when you're planning your target. Aim as high as you possibly can. Play up to your target, not play down. And there are a number of advantages to doing it that way. Eventually, when you submit that paper to that high-ranking journal, you're going to get incredible developmental feedback. There's a tremendous difference in the quality of the feedback you receive from journals. And it's directly correlated with the status of that journal as a high-ranking journal. Secondly, if you do succeed, of course, it builds up your resume, but more important, the process of trying to get to that high-ranking target is a great experience in doing all the things you need to do to get right. And I've talked about some of these on my blog posts on my website, so I'll not say any more about that right now. How many of you submitted a paper to this Academy meeting? Let me see your hands. Oh, good. How many of you submitted that paper in the week before the deadline? How many submitted it before a week before the deadline? Okay. Right. Why? So I never understand this. How many submitted the day before the deadline? 2 days before? 3 days before? Keep going. Oh, keep your hands up. 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Okay. So, you know now for next year the due date, more or less, right? You could submit that paper in November, December, mid-December, end of December, first couple of days in January. Why does that happen? Don't say anything. I know, it took you a long time to get started. Seemed like a big job. Better to wait, think it through, and then start working on it when there's enough time to make you really panic, right? That's not a very productive way to approach academic writing. How do I know this? Well, I've had this experience time and again. I'll be sitting at a red light in my car, I'll be out on the stream fishing, I'll be in the gym, and all of a sudden pops into my head an idea. A problem I was working on that seemed intractable. And all of a sudden it comes to me. Why is that? That's because your brain never sleeps. The psychologists in the room know that 90 plus, 95%, 99% plus of a thought is subconscious. Most of the processing that goes on in your brain you don't have access to. It's still working all the time, including while you sleep. And so what I tell my students and my junior colleagues, start early, because there's a very large penalty for not starting early. And it's not just because the day before the AOM deadline, the servers are going to crash. That certainly has happened in the past, okay? Servers crash. But no, I'm talking about a different kind of penalty. If you wait, don't start working on it, you don't get a chance to benefit from all the processing your brain is doing. So while you're sleeping, the brain is still working. It's doing housework, cleaning up, putting things together, associating things. While I'm fishing, while I'm jogging, whatever I'm doing, the brain is still sending me a signal. The brain knows, because I started early. In particular, I've sent a signal to my brain, this is an important project. More importantly, you've got your brain on the case. You also, when you start early, have lots of opportunities to get help. You're never going to get feedback from your colleagues if you come in the week before the deadline and say to them, I've got this paper I'm submitting to AOM next week. Can you read it the next day and give me feedback? By contrast, if you, at the end of November, beginning of December, mid-December, you say to your colleagues, would you please help me with this? No matter where they are, here or somewhere else, you're going to get some help. So starting early gives your brain a chance to start working on this project, and more importantly, gives you a chance to get feedback from other people. And the final piece to this is, we know from talking to lots of scholars and talking to journal editors, the most important thing that determines how ultimately good the paper is is how often it's been revised. How many times have you been back to it? Now, in this room, I think, is Phil still here someplace? Where is Phil? Okay. So Phil knows what I mean. He and I, when we're working together, version 1, version 10, version 15, version 20, how far should I keep going? 20, 25? Okay. I go through iterations of my work. I go through dozens of iterations of my work because I have time to do that. If I start on a paper months before it's due, getting feedback, thinking about it, coming back to it, making it better, I'll have a much better paper when that AOM deadline does actually roll around. So don't needlessly penalize yourself. Start early. When you go back home from this meeting, find out when next year's AOM deadline is. Mark it on your calendar, count back 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Decide which of those milestone points you begin with, and then work your way forward. Okay, when you sit down to begin the actual writing of your paper, how many of you are sitting down at a table or desk surrounded by books, journal articles, PDFs? Hands up. Oh yeah, okay. True confessions. I can help you. We have a program. That is a sign to me you have started to write too early. If you're sitting down with a lot of stuff around you, unprocessed raw material around you, you have started too soon. I ask people, why do you have all this stuff? And they say, well, you know, I could forget something. Or I want to look at it, I want to make sure I have it exactly right, so I look it up. Or I read that a long time ago, I forgot exactly what's in it. Let me stop and get to it. So you have a person sitting there at the computer, typing a little bit, stopping, going over here, typing, back over to this. It's an incredibly inefficient use of your brain and your time. There's a much better way to do this. And the goal, ultimately, is to sit down when you're doing production writing with only a conceptual outline next to you. All the raw materials, their worth to you reflected in the interpretive notes you've taken. So, the key takeaway, you need to learn, I would say, to take interpretive notes on what you read. Now, what does that mean? Again, when I ask my students, especially undergraduates, I say, show me the notes you've taken. Well, typically they'll give me the actual document. They'll hand me a PDF, and then in the margins of the PDF, there's stuff scribbled. Unfortunately, sometimes it's also a book. I hope it's not a library book, but they do a lot of scribbling. I say, what does that say? I'm not sure. Okay. You should have as a goal when you're reading stuff, read the document, a few pages of whatever it takes to get something going in your mind, put it aside, and write a note. What does this mean for you? Not just summarizing what you've just read, but what does it mean? What's the interpretation of this? Why is it relevant to the project you're working on? Or why is it not? Why is this thing you just read now recognizably irrelevant to the project? Write that down. Why did you have a visceral reaction to this? Why did you feel so angry when you write that down? These are notes. This is not writing in a paper. This is writing a note to your future self. Because your future self, in a week, a month, 2 months, won't remember the experience precisely, what was involved in that reading. You've got to tell your future self, this is why you read that article. So you write down in the notes, I read this article because I had seen it mentioned in another article which said that it was state of the art, or which said that it described a process that I think is very germane to what I'm trying to study. You write that down. then you say either yes, they were right, or no, it turns out I see the flaws in this argument. Here are the flaws. So this experience of working with what you've read and turning it into your own words is a crucial part for me of the writing preparation process. Another way to think about this, imagine if you were building that cathedral and you said to your transportation people, yeah, bring all those, set some dynamite off at the cliff and bring all those gigantic rocks up to the building site. Or you're building a log cabin. You're a survivalist type in Utah someplace. Building a log cabin. And you say to your forester, cut some giant trees on it, drag those giant trees to the building site. Well, that's absurd, isn't it? But that's what you're doing when you're sitting there with your raw materials, right? What do the builders want? Well, stonemasons want blocks. They want carved out blocks of certain sizes. People building a log cabin want boards cut to fit. They want boards that are reasonable to work with. Well, the same issue applies to the raw material that will go into the document you're writing. You want to make sure that it reflects the emotions you felt at the time you read it, and make sure it reflects the narrative or the theme that you were working on. Now, another piece to this, and this is the last point on the slide, the danger in sitting down to write with unprocessed stuff is that your document is going to look a lot like the stuff you were just looking at in that setting. In other words, you're going to just channel Howard Aldrich or Jim Marge or Carl Weick or whoever you've just read. Right? It's going to look a lot like the stuff you've just read. Now, I know what I said. I'm not going to read a paper that basically is mostly about what I already said, or Jim Marge or Carl Weick or somebody. I want to know what your contribution is. But how do you know what your contribution is? If the first time you've confronted the prospect of putting into words, your own words, what somebody else said and what it means for your project. The time to do that is when you're taking the notes on the stuff you read. Find your own voice by writing interpretive notes in your own voice. And by taking that document and turning it over and not slavishly copying out word for word what's in the document, you will have to do that. You will have to find your own voice early on. That's a tremendous discovery to make early in the process. Now, it may turn out, and this is why it's very important, every single piece of paper or spreadsheet or document you touch, every single sheet should have a date on it. I can't stress this enough. I can guarantee you, if I looked at the notes you've taken or the computer documents you've written, I can guarantee you maybe it's got a file stamp on it, but you need to have the date of that idea stamped into your document, because you have to know 1, 2, 3 months from now when you look at the stuff and you say, wow, this looks really good. And then you forgot, well, yeah, that's what I thought 3 months ago, but a month later I realized that was all bogus. And I wrote another note that revoked that earlier statement. So document everything so your future self knows what it's working with. So interpretive notes, not summaries. Find your own voice by telling your future self why this is important. Oh, by the way, I'm happy to take questions as we're going through. There'll be time at the end. Anybody totally confused? Can't be done? How many think it can't be done? Good. That was your last chance. Okay. Okay. Minor point, but a point that my first year honors seminar students routinely drive home to me, which is the importance of taking control of your environment. So we know most people in America don't get enough sleep. Routinely we get reports of people sleep deprived. So first of all, it's hard to work to your full capacity if you haven't got enough sleep. Secondly, you need to find a place to work that's isolated and can be protected against interlopers. How many times have you had this experience? You sit down to write, you're at your computer, you're all set to go, ping, oh, that could be important. Ping, oh, yeah, I better answer that now because I'll forget otherwise. Or you're in a coffee shop. Hey, how's it going? Oh, fine, how are you? You're in the library. Can I stop you for a moment and ask you a question? That is death to the creative process. We know from studies, every time you stop a project that's cognitively complex, it takes you 4 to 5 minutes to get it going again. Every time. So every time that little siren ping tells you that you've got an email, a Facebook posting, a Twitter posting, an Instagram photo, a Snapchat from your cousin, there goes 5 minutes out of your life. 5 minutes you won't get back. Okay. So turn it off. Close the door. Find a place where nobody can find you, or if you feel you have to be in the coffee shop because you're not caffeinated up enough and you need at least once an hour get another dose of caffeine, buy some headphones. Don't plug them in. Just put the headphones on your ears. Let the cable dangle down so nobody can tell you. And then when they come up, you go like this. Can't tell. Okay. And turn off all the alerts on your devices. Turn them off. Don't have any alert on your devices that pings you that something has happened. Nothing is more important than getting your project done. Right? It's a mindset. Nothing is more important than getting a project done. Now, I've made a note up here because it's important to make a distinction in what I've been saying to you about two kinds of writing. There's what my colleagues who do a lot of field work call, or also creative writing, free writing, or spew drafts. That's kind of well, you get the idea, right? Spew draft. Yeah. It's writing without any particular constraints. You just sit down. You could do this at the end of the day. You could do this when you're feeling tired about taking notes. You sit down and you just write. Just write. What do I think? Carl Weichel used to tell me, we were colleagues at Cornell for a decade. I took me more decades after that to finally realize what Carl was telling me. Eventually I figured it out. So Carl used to say, how do I know what I think until I see what I've said? Right? It was one of his favorite sayings. How do I know what I think until I see what I've said? Free writing is a great way to discover, do you actually know anything? When you're away from the stuff you've read and you're just sitting by yourself with a blank screen on the computer, can you actually say anything that makes any sense? How are you going to find that out? Well, you got to write. You got to free write, not production writing. This is writing you don't care about mistakes, grammar, spelling. You don't edit while you go through it. You just write. Production writing, by contrast, is the last thing you do. Production writing is when you actually have the conceptual outline, you've got the interpretive notes, you've got the theme, you know what you want to do, then you can produce something. And that's a very different kind of writing than free writing. It's also very different than taking notes, because now you do express your own voice and it has to be there. That's production writing. I put a note in here, again, I think most of you probably know this. How many of you copy edit while you write? Let me see. About half, not quite, that's good. Okay, well, most of, yeah. Again, there are ways to actually do that. You can trick yourself. You can say, every couple of pages I can stop and go back and copy edit. Or every section I can copy edit. Or once an hour, right before I take my break, I can copy edit. But you should never copy edit while you write. So if you have to, turn off in Microsoft Word, turn off that little thing that puts the blue lines under stuff. That's gonna, this is like that's the shiny object, right? It's like ping, oh, an Instagram photo. Oh man, look at that kitten. Whoa. Right? Don't let those little blue lines distract you from the job of getting words onto paper. Now, in the scheme that I used, a conceptual outline is the final step before I begin production writing. And I have here, these are suggestions because I can't say they are rules. They're very hard to do. And I'll you'll see what I mean. I know it's tempting sometimes when you're writing, especially if you know a lot about the methods you're going to use or you know a lot about the literature, it's very tempting to write your paper in pieces. Right? Okay, I'll write the methods section, I know that. I'll write the literature review, I'll do this. Right, it's very easy, it's tempting to do that. The trouble is that means a lot of unwriting eventually, because ultimately what you're going to send to your readers, your committee, your co-authors, to the journals, you're going to send an integrated document. And the best way to integrate a document is to start at the beginning and work your way through it in more or less narrative order. So I tell my students, when you're going to sit down to do production writing, start with the first paragraph. Start with the first paragraph. And that's really hard. Because if you're to the point now where it's, okay, I've got to write the paper. What's in the first paragraph? If you don't know at that point what your paper is about, that's an insurmountable obstacle. If you've done some free writing, done interpretive notes, built a conceptual outline, you probably can do that. What is that? For example, some of you know a paper by Aldrich and Thiel called Fools Rush In. How many know that paper, Fools Rush In? Okay, yeah, so what's the paper about? Entrepreneurs, when they're starting businesses and industries with no precedents, face a number of constraints. They're trying to convince a skeptical set of investors that it's worthwhile investing in this product. They're trying to convince consumers that this is a good thing to do. They also have a problem in that working as individuals, they may well be in conflict with one another, so it makes a lot of sense to find a way to get collective action going in that industry to generate the solidarity they would need to get through that initial point, and so on. That's the first paragraph of that paper. I can do it now. I know what the paper's about. I can tell you in a paragraph, I can do that. Most of my I shouldn't say, my memory's not as good as it used to be, but usually that's what I can do. When I get to the point where I know I have a paper, it means, or turn it around. When I know I have the first paragraph, I know I have a paper. If I haven't got a first paragraph, I don't care how much data I haven't got a paper. If I can't express in that first paragraph the problematic, what's the narrative going to be, if I can't do that, I'm not ready yet to write. I got to figure that out. I can go back, do some more free writing, but when I get to the production writing stage, I should be able to write that first paragraph. The fact that I can't do it means I started too soon. Make this clear. I've started the production writing too soon. Doesn't mean you've started writing too soon. You should be writing all along, all the time. But production writing, your own special space from an outline, you should have that paragraph. Now you see on this, I've got listed what I call forego encyclopedic coverage. And then I threw in something on my slide. I didn't have this before, but I thought I'd throw this in just to kind of put the knife in. You'll never catch up. What do I mean by that? I started reading organizations, journals, sociology journals. I started reading them, actually sociology journals I started reading in 1963. I started reading seriously the Administrative Science Quarterly and taking part in the editorial process in 1969-70. How many years is that? That's a real question. How many years have I been doing this? 55. Okay. Okay. So I have at least a 50 plus year head start on all of you. You'll never catch up. Right? You cannot read fast enough to catch up to what I've read. Think about it. How are you going to do it? How are you going to convince me anything you have to tell me is important? You're never going to catch up. You can start reading today, not sleep for the rest of your life, and you're not going to catch up. Okay. So forget reading everything. Not going to happen. In entrepreneurship alone, there are over 100 English language journals. You can't even read the stuff published this year. let alone this stuff published out, and get anything else done, of course, if you have a life. You can't do that. It's not possible. The only way you're going to get through this is early on figuring out some particular story you want to tell, figuring out a search strategy to find that relevant literature, and then having at it. Encyclopedic coverage is just out. You can always read one more paper. You can always find one more relevant article. But it's hopeless. Right? Now, okay, that's hyperbole, I admit it. I mean, clearly, occasionally you do want to read that one more article. But as a search strategy, think about this. It's not about how much you read, because you can't read enough. It's about being smart in what you read. We could talk about that. When I come to these meetings and I am talking to people about their projects, and I ask, especially students, I say to them, tell me what you're doing. Typically what I will get from those conversations is I start telling me about the data. I have this data, I have that data, I got this data from this, I did these surveys, I went to these archives, I observed this particular group. I hear about the data. I say, okay, I don't want to hear about it. Tell me, what's the idea? What's the idea? What are you trying to do? What's the story? What should I take away from this conversation, apart from the fact that you're really good at getting information from people by asking them questions? The difficulty with this approach, and now I'm not going to tell you what that picture is. We'll wait till later. Maybe some people will figure it out. The difficulty in starting with your data is that it leads to some very bad practices. If you start thinking about your project as I got to get some data, and I've got to analyze some data, you start framing the questions you want to ask around the data that's available to you. You start narrowing your horizons. You start thinking, what is possible? Right? You limit yourself. What can I do? What's possible with this? That's not the way to think. Right? You should be challenging yourself. Okay, here's what I want to do. What's the best possible design for this? You're not going to achieve it. Later on, you apologize for that in the notes somewhere in your paper. You say, I couldn't, in the best of all possible worlds, I would have had data on X, Y, and Z. I didn't. Here's what I did instead. You can do that. But if you start out by limiting yourself to talking about the data you have and to creating hypotheses that are about your data, as opposed to saying, what would be the best way to test this? 1, 2, 3, 4. You got, okay, maybe 4 ways to test this. I can do 2 of them. I can't do the other 2. Why can't I do the other 2? Well, wait a minute. I could do one of those if I just spent some more time, or if I found a collaborator. Yeah, I could do the second one too if I spent a little more time in the archives or got a grant. Right? You have to ask yourself, what's the best possible way to test this? And then when that fails, in your paper, you can tell us what you didn't do, and now you've got good reasons, because if you have thought about it, you've tried hard, you haven't done it, okay, we'll accept that. I'll accept you telling me I wanted to do it this way, but I couldn't do it because there were some constraints I couldn't avoid. That's a great movie, by the way, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so now we get to the fun part of the talk, where I stop hectoring you and instead invite you to play a little contest. On the left side of the page there, this is about choosing titles, by the way. Oh, let me stop. So one of the other little tricks about my work, I said to you, I already said to you, I like to start a paper when I have the first paragraph. I know I've really got the paper nailed when I have a title for it. So and Phil knows this, one of the goals of my projects and working through these early interpretive notes is I got to figure out, what am I going to call this paper? And I have a sad story to tell you about how I learned this. Back in 1970-71, I put a lot of work into a paper with a colleague at Johns Hopkins studying civil disorders in America. We sent it to the American Sociological Review, top journal in the field. It got accepted. Unfortunately, the paper was called, wait for it, Patterns of Vandalism During Civil Disorders as an Indicator of Target Selection. Doesn't that just grip you? Patterns of vandalism during civil disorders as an indicator of target selection. A couple of years ago in a British journal, let me get this right, there was a paper called Mad Mobs and Englishmen in the 2011 Riots. Which paper is going to get more citations? Right. So I resolved after that debacle back in the early 70s, okay, this is not going to happen to me again. And so I started working on my titles. And I recognized when I started doing this that the titles actually started taking on a life of their own. And so one of the things I learned, so the second line there, I learned if you choose a title that's outrageous, like Even Dwarfs Started Small. How many of you read that? Even Dwarfs Started Small? Oh, it's bad. Okay. Fools Rush In, you've read. Okay. Who's the Boss? Who's the Boss? How many read that? Gender? All right, so maybe it's not such a good strategy. Small World, Infinite Possibilities, that's the paper with Phil. What I learned is that if I choose a title that's really outrageous and it conveys on its surface something of weight and substance, I work hard to justify that title. And so what I've given you on the left side are some of the principles that I've followed. One of the things I like to do is surprise my readers. So a paper that Steve Lippman and I had in the Academy of Management Review, I think now 2 years ago or 3 years ago, was called A Rolling Stone Gathers Momentum. See that little twist, right? What you were expecting, a Rolling Stone gathers, right? So there are ways, just spend a little time on it. It's going to drive if you're a graduate student, it's going to drive your mentor crazy. Just tell him I told you to do this. If you're a junior faculty member and sending it to an editor, you're going to find the editor probably not so happy with it. We had a paper, Martin Roof and I had a paper, some of you might have read the paper on homophily in teams back in 2003. And the initial title of that paper, which I chose, was Don't Go to Strangers. Now, if you're a blues fan, you know that's a line from a song. Right? Anybody? No. Don't make me sing it. Don't make me sing it. It's about if you're in need of company, don't go to strangers, come to me. It's about somebody who's in need and needs some loving and inviting the person to help them with this. Unfortunately, the editor sent it to some reviewers who, unlike my colleagues on the paper, had less, shall we say, they were a little tight, I guess I would say, a little tight. And so the paper finally got titled some bore. I don't know what it's called now. It's got a halfway decent title, but I love that title. So it's going to happen sometimes. You're going to just be ahead of your reviewers. But nonetheless, it's our job. Our job is not to make editors' lives easier. Right? Your job is not to make an editor's life easy. It's to make their life hard. Give them something to do. Write an interesting title. Finally, one last bit of advice, especially for junior faculty who are here. I mentioned already the benefits of starting early are that you get, or have the possibility of getting, feedback from your friends and associates. It's almost impossible, I would say, in the 21st century to get a paper accepted that hasn't been circulated among at least the SSRN network or among some of the working groups you might be part of, the writing groups you're a part of. And students often say to me, well, I don't know how to do that. So one of the things you can do, again, as a junior faculty member or as a doctoral student, is to turn the game around. Right? Think about it. Your problem is trying to find somebody else to read your paper. Well, if that's a problem you have, that means your colleagues have that same problem. You could help them. Take the first step. Ask your colleagues, ask your friends, ask your faculty members at meetings like this after a presentation. You'll be going to presentations the next few days. You hear a paper you like, go up to the person. You know, I think I have a few suggestions that might be helpful to you. Can you send me your paper? Or your colleagues. Better place to practice probably at this stage. Ask them to send the paper to you. You're going to make comments on it. And then show them what you mean by making helpful comments. So don't use track changes. That's for co-authors. You all know the function in Word called insert comments. How many know this? Insert comments. How many use it? Great. How many use track changes? How many use track changes when you're not working with a co-author? Okay, so that's not bad. Track changers only for co-authors. Right. Unless you're going to be a co-author for a paper, don't use track changes. That's not your job. It could be dangerous. Insert comments is for making substantive comments on people's papers. So get that paper from your colleague, and don't make a lot of comments. You don't make, that's a big problem we've seen with pedagogy. When you write comments on students' papers and you cover it with red ink or blue ink or whatever you use, it's intimidating. So don't make a lot of comments. Make big comments. Like say, this first paragraph doesn't set the paper up properly. Or the literature you reviewed is only one field you could attach this to. Here's another literature you could look at. Right? Big comments like that. Do that. Send the paper back to the person. Wait for the hopeful, the positive response. And then when the conversation ensues, the person says to you, geez, that was great, Mary. I really appreciate you making these comments to me. Could I help you as well? And you say, oh, gee, you want to help me? Oh, well, if you feel like doing that, sure. I'd be happy to take your help. So you've shown them what you mean by helpful comments. You've modeled the process. Got it back in a timely fashion. You didn't cover the paper with lots of irrelevant comments. You didn't point out typos, grammatical mistakes. That's not your job. You pointed to big things. And they will do the same thing. You'd be surprised at the professional meetings like this. You'd be surprised at how many, well, turn it around. You'd be surprised at how few papers get commented on by people who send for them. And some of you are going to do this. You're either going to send for a paper or you're going to give your business card to an author and you're going to get the papers. But very few people bother making comments. So when you make a comment on somebody's paper, especially somebody you don't know, who doesn't know you, that's a mitzvah. That's a really good thing to do. And it's going to get you a lot of brownie points. So use your time, junior faculty, doctoral students, at these meetings, find people whose papers you genuinely are interested in, ask them, can I make comments on this? And then follow through with comments. Finally, so I've been doing this for about six decades, 7 decades, 6? What is it, Phil? 5 decades? Oh, right. Sorry, time passes. Time passes, I don't know. Since the 1950s, the 1960s. I've been doing this a long time. It's important to recognize that this is not all there is to life, okay? So one of the things that I started doing many, many years ago is trying to find ways to not just be a writing machine. And so I'm suggesting here a couple of things. One of them is to unplug. I've already talked about that. Have a smartphone-free day. I went through this. I was in Montana about 3 weeks ago, out there for a week. I left my cell phone in the cabin. Didn't have the cell phone from breakfast until late at night. Whole day without a cell phone. It was no problem. It's great, day after day. No cell phone, no mobile phone, no emails, no texts. It's possible. And then find something to do. Now, I see you looking around the room here. Most of you probably have discovered gymnasiums. Am I right? How many gymnasium goers do we have out there? How many people work out? Let me see. That's not bad, okay, yeah. We know from studies of cognitive functioning, we know that there's a tremendous return to time invested in staying aerobically fit. So if you don't do it now, I can tell you as an assistant professor, those of you junior faculty out there know this, it's very hard to find the time to do that. So if you're going to take advantage of the power your brain has and feed it the oxygen it needs and the blood that it needs, you need to start at least something aerobic and start putting it into your schedule. So I tell my colleagues, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after 3:30, I'm not going to be available. No meetings, no conference, nothing. I'm gone, 3:30, 3 days a week. I've been doing this now about 30 years. And it works. You know, when you're just not there, people can't ask you questions. I leave my cell phone in the car. Unlike the people on the gym floor that I see who are doing a machine, then they get up and they look at their phone, they put it down, do another machine. Or they're on the machine and they're doing it at the same time. Or they're on the treadmill doing it at the same time, and the next time they're on the floor. So pay yourself as well as paying the field. You know, take the time to discover something that can give you that time off from the academic life, and that will make you a better person. Okay, now we have about 15 minutes till I've got to catch a plane. So, questions? Well, let me ask you a question. So, of all that I've told you today, which of these things I've told you seems the most difficult to implement? Which of these things are you going to walk away, or you actually, maybe now you're thinking already, I can't do that. I can't, it's not possible, I can't do that.
Setting aside proper time for research and nothing else. There's so many, especially project management going on, so many other things. It's hard to.
Okay, so I think one of the 7 habits of successful people is that, just as with workouts, I found that if I want to get something done, for example, I start in the morning, I don't look at my email, I don't look at any of my social media accounts. The first thing I do is start on the project. And only when I've got hours of work into that do I do something else. So, but in general, you have to schedule that time and make it inviolate. You have to actually, and it's best to constrain yourself. The way to do this is like with a lot of other things in life. One way to tie yourself down is to make commitments, to make obligations. Tell somebody, it's like if you have a writing group, you oblige yourself to doing so many pages per week you bring to the group. With your research project, you say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 8 to 11 or 8 to 12 is research only. I won't check email, right? I won't take meetings, right? Just do that. You have to a priori put the blocks in, and then you have to stick to your guns. Question over here. Yes? Okay. Other questions?
You mentioned a couple of times not starting to write too soon. So I'm still not clear on how we know when it's too soon, or how we know actually that it's not too soon, that's the right time.
Okay. So one of the clearest tests would be if you can write that first paragraph. Right? If you sit down, you say, okay, I'm studying team formation among minority groups, and I'm interested in the extent to which mentors change the composition of the teams, let's say. Right, that's my topic area. And so when you get to the point where you say, okay, I can write the first paragraph and I know what the paper's about, and not just descriptively, not just what I just said was descriptive, but you can actually put it in terms of the problem that disadvantaged groups have in creating entrepreneurial teams is that they often lack access to information and other resources they need, and under what conditions do they overcome that limitation would be a beginning point. So when you can write the first paragraph, it probably means you understand it well enough to start to keep going. If on the other hand, you try to write the first paragraph and all you get is gibberish or gobbledygook, or it's just descriptive again, then it's not time yet. So that's one thing to do. The second thing, in my searches, I typically pick out a couple of iconic articles I will go look at the citations they have, and I will start with the present and work back. First of all, I'll see how often they've been cited. Then I start backwards and I see what kind of pattern do I see with these iconic papers. Do I see any kind of cumulative development, or do I see they've all led to a point now where there's a lacuna, there's a big problem here that people can't get past. So I say, okay, yeah, that's it. I'm going to have to write about that, and I'm going to stop reading. There's no point in reading anymore. I'm going in a circle now. So when you read stuff and it becomes redundant, so the next paper is superfluous, and that's actually a lot of our field. Well, never mind. No, I didn't say that. So try the first paragraph. Try diminishing returns to research. Both of those two things I think, are a way of. But it's critical that, I come back again to this point, you have to free write. Students don't write enough. Junior faculty don't write enough. You can't just write when you're going to write a paper. That's not enough writing. You can't just write when you have to write a paper for these meetings, for example. You should be writing all the time, something. Every day, you need to practice. It's an art. There's some science to it. There's a lot of books on writing. On my website, I've got a bunch of tips for that. But you have to write a lot, and writing a lot is going to free you up to get to that first paragraph. Other questions?
So I appreciated the advice to start with the theory and then sort of make the data work for you, because it can be limiting to sort of go the other direction. But I keep imagining, like designing the perfect log cabin and then waking up one day and realizing you're on an island with no trees or something. Like, have you ever written something that you expected to be an empirical paper, like written the front half and then realized that you literally can't do anything with it? Like, have you ever faced that level of constraint?
Yeah, I've had editors tell me that there's no point in continuing down this route. I have papers, I have unpublished papers that I've stopped working on. Yeah, because I realized, one comes to mind right now, a paper on ecology, the ecology of trade associations, and it was a replication, and it turned out it was just a replication, and it wasn't very interesting at that. So unfortunately, it took the reviewers and the editor to point this out to me. When they said it, I saw it immediately, and I wrote them back. I thanked them, put the paper in a drawer. It's still there. So, yeah, it's happened. I've gone through projects and realized that they were not worth doing. Typically now I don't. Now I'm better at that. I think now you're right to think about the constraints. I think if you're on an island to begin with, you probably wouldn't start thinking about log cabins. You're probably thinking about, how can I fuse silicon into glass and make myself a glass bottom boat to get out of here, probably would be my guess. Yeah.
Back to your first question, what you think you can't do. I'm curious about how you go between your interpretive notes, free writing, and how that interplay works. And I can't figure out how you would transition into free writing. Do you do it right after you take interpretive notes, or is that like the next day and then you're going to write on that? Or is it kind of...
Yeah, one of the things you can do is that I tend to build up pretty big stacks of paper. When by the way, I write everything. I do by hand. I don't. When I'm writing interpretive notes, when I'm writing my outlines, it's all on paper. It's all, this kind of stuff. I love it. So I have a stack of papers, and I'll look through them occasionally, and I'll say, okay, is there anything here I can write about? Like, what do I see in this? So then I'll write a meta comment. Okay, I may make reference, and I have everything is dated, so I'll refer to another dated memo, and I'll say something about this is, in the memo I wrote to myself on 8/1/18, I said X. Now I realize that that's not going to work, or here's the reason why it won't work. So the free writing is in part a commentary on the notes I've already written. Right? They're not very long. Some of my colleagues, I have an ethnographer colleague who writes pages and pages. I don't do that. My Free writing is usually a few pages. But what I have in the end, I should have told you this, when I have a conceptual outline and I've got all these interpretive notes, I actually go through the interpretive notes, I number them, and I stick them in the outline where they're going to go. So my paper is half written. If I get the outline and I've got these interpretive notes, and the interpretive notes are in my voice, when I'm writing, I pick up the interpretive note. Okay, this is note number 25. I said in the outline number 25 goes here. I clean it up a little bit, make it more formal, but it's already in there. So the actual writing process is pretty easy. I find production writing is really easy because I know what I want to say. It's all there in the interpretive notes and in the outline. And I can write 15, 20 pages in a couple of days. My youngest son is a professor at Northeastern, and he writes the same way. He can turn out 10, 15 pages a day. But it's because he knows what he wants to say. If you don't know what you want to say, it's not going to happen. If you haven't got something to say, don't say it. Yes?
Conceptual outline, so you have so you start with the conceptual outline, because so you have the story in your head that you want to tell, and then you're going to look at the literature, and then you make interpretive notes, and then so how do you structure that basically? So you have to make a conceptual outline first.
No, the outline, I can only get to a conceptual outline when I've done the interpretive notes, because I don't know where we're going yet. The interpretive notes are me trying to figure out what's in the literature and what I can contribute. And so now back to the question earlier, if I interpretive notes are vacuous, then I'm going to stop. But the idea is that you write these interpretive notes because you're trying to see, do you have any value added? And you can't see that. If you don't write it down, you don't. That's a big problem I have talking to students. They have no idea whether their ideas are any good because they never wrote them down. They just carry them around in their heads. And they have the summaries of the articles they read, but that's the words of the author they've read. Right? They don't have their own words anyplace. And you can't carry that much stuff around in your head and retain it. It's just not going to work. You have to externalize it. So the conceptual outline follows from the process of doing the interpretive notes. What do they mean? And then is there a natural, actually there are multiple stories you could tell. Just, it's somewhat arbitrary about how you do it, but I build a conceptual outline from my interpretive notes. And then I see where the gaps are, then I may have to go back and read some more. Does that help? Other questions? Yeah.
Just a question in terms of, obviously, especially a lot of the assistant professors, you might be working on a handful of different projects or papers at once, and the sort of flows of jumping between those. Do you think it's best to be spending a day on one paper, a whole week on one paper, or how do you jump through that?
We've got some pretty good data from the pedagogy literature called interleaving. We know with students' classes, it really helps a lot to do 2 hours of this, 2 hours of this, 2 hours of this. It helps to move back and forth because you get the contrast between them heightens your awareness of what's in them. So I would say if you're working on multiple projects, you never want to spend a week and then a week and then a week. I'm not even sure I would do a day. I would more, again, it depends if you're reading books and writing notes on them. If you're collecting data, it's going to be hard, but I would try to interleave them. I would try to have stuff juxtaposed, project A, project B, project C, back to A again throughout the week, because that there should be some synergy. Now, that speaks to a bigger question we haven't talked about. I think you will in your consortium, but the bigger problem of having some kind of plan for your projects as opposed to one-offs. I typically work on projects now that are 10-year, I always have worked on projects that are 10 years. If you look at my project I started with back in 1966 on small businesses, that 4 waves of panel data, 66, 68, 70, 72, and then I still published from that in 1976, 77. I had another project in the UK I started in 78, 80, 82, 84, still publishing on that in 1990. My trade association project, that was a 3-year data collection, and then, so most of the projects I work on are really long term. I'm working on a makerspace project now. I'm in the 4th or 5th year of that. It's a 10-year project. So maybe, I'm hoping, but while I'm still upright, there'll be something coming from that, but it's, it doesn't matter. But that's my goal. So when you have a long-term, if you have enough stuff that you've got the long-term view you can take, then it doesn't feel you don't feel so rushed or such an urgent need to get everything done right away. Then you can stage it. Yes, other questions? Oops. That's American Airlines. I'm coming. Any other questions? Yes?
How often do you free
I free write whenever it's hard to answer that question because it's hard to know. I have scraps of paper on my desk. So right now in my office, there's stacks, there's scrap paper every place with words and dates and things like that. So a lot. Some of it's trivial. It's just small little things, but I try to do that. Again, I'm not doing the kind of writing that some of my colleagues do, which is much more extensive. My free writing is quite short typically. It's really just to summarize something. Typically because after I've read something in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the New Yorker, I get a lot of ideas, and I'll write something down about what I learned from that article, and I hang on to that for a while. And it may not go anyplace. It may just be one-off, and that's it. It goes into the files. Never find it again. But I try to write a lot. Okay, one last question.
Yeah, so two of your suggestions, one was don't copy it as you go, and the other one was like make sure your first paragraph is stellar. And I see myself like getting tripped up on that first paragraph because I know how important that is to paper, to where like I'm really spending an exorbitant, maybe a disproportionate amount of time in that first paragraph, because in my mind, if I get that first paragraph right, the rest of the paper kind of flows. So I just want to get your kind of comments on maybe something I could do to kind of facilitate becoming more efficient in writing.
Well, again, remember, it's the name of the game is revision. Revise, revise, revise. So, or another thing my father used to say, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You've heard that expression? That's what you're talking about. The perfect is the enemy of the good. The first draft doesn't have to be perfect. It has to make sense, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So I would say, if that first paragraph's in English, it's in complete sentences. I would keep going, and then come back the next day. Yeah, I can't tell you how almost every project I've ever worked on has gone through at least 25 or 30 drafts, and I've had some up into low hundreds, versions. Now, they may not change very much from draft to draft, but they change enough I have to number them. That's another thing with my co-authors. I'm working on a book now, and we call version control. We have dates on everything, version 1, version 2, everything is, we know where it's been, we know who's had it, and then because the expectation is it's not done until it's finished, or it's not finished until it's done, right? And that's, you just keep at it. So I think getting away from the idea of perfection, back to the rocks in the cathedral, right? The rocks don't suddenly assemble into a cathedral, right? The rocks got chopped into blocks and hauled to a site, and they got cut up still further and numbered and to where they go. That's the process you want to think about. It's not overnight sensation, despite heroic assumptions. It's pretty rare that happens. Okay, I gotta get out of here. Thank you all. I'll see you tomorrow night.